morning, everybody. It's an immense honor for me to introduce Prasad Kaipa. He's the author of the critically acclaimed book, From Smart to Wise, Acting and Leading with Wisdom. In his book, he argues with profound insight why it's not good enough to be smart. And in this room, we're all guilty of being smart, and Prasad's work teaches how to be wise in whatever we do beyond smartness. Prasad has had a highly distinguished career as an advisor and coach to corporate executives of Fortune 500 companies over the last 25 years. He taught executive education programs organized by INSEAD Business School, University of Southern California, Dartmouth, IBM Bangalore, among several others. He's a faculty member at Saybrook University, has been a visiting professor at Indian School of Business since 2003, where he founded the Center for Leadership, Innovation and Change institution and served as its executive director. Has been on the board of directors or trustees for a number of organizations, including International Leadership Association, Margo Innovation Foundation, Samskrita Bharati USA, Integral Leadership Review, Lead India 2020, Society for Organizational Learning, Anke, Mentor Cloud, Intertech Communications, and Hindu University of North America.
It's okay.
So I picked an excerpt from his bio.
Thank you. I'm honored to present here, and one of the things in my book which we also write is we interviewed actually several executives from IBM, including your previous chairman Sam Palmisano and several other executives. So first of all, there was some hesitation regarding working with my book, because my book calls From Smart to Wise, and your PR personality said, you know, we are about smarter planet, but how would that conflict with what you are trying to say? Once we had long conversations, we began to realize what you are looking at is not just about being stuck with where we are, but it is about creating something smarter, something wiser. It is not about the status quo. So at that time, I could get the interview with Mr. Palmisano and several other executives. So the key it comes down to is, first of all, how do we frame ourselves? How do we actually begin to identify ourselves? Because how we identify and what is the context in which we look at ourselves can shape what we can create, what we don't create. For example, if I ask a question, how many of you are smart? I would like to just see how many of you raise the hands, first of all. It's an interesting scenario. Half of the people would not raise the hand, may not be for the reason that you are smart or you are not smart, but how you identify yourself to be smart. So at some level, that means there is a cognitive framing that allows us to operate in a certain context with certain application and action. Whether you feel smart, that would be in one way. If you don't feel you are smart, maybe because you are humble, maybe because of the cultural, maybe because of values, maybe because of some other traditions, it doesn't matter. But based on how you frame, there may be an initial hesitation, or there may be an initial way to take it forward with a different framing. So for example, if I ask you, how many of you think you are wise? Good. So maybe 3, 4 of you. So that means, just like smartness, there are also barriers, especially for wisdom. There are a lot more barriers. As a matter of fact, one gentleman, he asked me straightforward, you are writing a book about wisdom. Are you wise? If you are, you wouldn't be writing it. If you are not, you don't have authority to write it. Both ways, why are you doing this research on wisdom? Because there are connotations regarding wisdom from the spiritual traditions, from, whether it is Aristotle or whether it is Indian spiritual tradition, whether you take Judeo-Christian traditions, wisdom has come to a particular place. How can anybody aspire to be wise? And it takes certain, what you might call age or experience or certain life experiences that you reframed in a way that you could be wise. So, there are several what you might call assumptions, beliefs and myths which I encountered as I interviewed over 200 people from around the world from different disciplines, including about 30-35 CEOs, extraordinary people, Nobel laureates, neurosurgeons, so philosophers. I had a chance to do a lot of research over past 20 years. I did used to be, just like you, a researcher. I was in Apple. I was a research fellow at Apple University 25 years ago, looking at user interface design and designing intelligent tools for augmenting human intelligence. So, we looked at, maybe we can't aspire wisdom, but we can look at 5 elements and we can design tools for it. How do people learn, and how do people continue to learn after their first failure? So, that means there is resiliency. Second, how do people think? Because thinking allows people to come up with new algorithms, new frames of reference, new ways of designing tools that requires us to think outside the normal frame where all the thoughts reside, whether it is you are an expert or whether you are not an expert, whether you have a beginner's mind or whether you have an expert mind, your thinking process could be different. Third, we looked at how do we create. There may be a lot of thinkers, but not all thinkers end up being innovators. The way in which what you might call effectual learners, that means entrepreneurs think, they think at what is the effect they are creating, and sometimes they think backwards according to some of the research. Whereas philosophers are generally what we think is going forward. So, there are different ways of how you create, how you innovate can have impact on what you end up creating. So, learning, thinking, creativity, collaborating, and then finally leading. Because if you have a frame of personal leadership, then you look at it in a different way. Or if you look at leadership more as an organization, how many people are reporting to me, how many people do I lead, then you have a different framing. So, these are the 5 areas which we began to look at. So, that research carried over for past 23 years to began to look at what is the smartness and what if smartness is at some level related to dumbness. So, I am curious, how many of you have read my book or have come across my book so far? No, nobody. Okay, good. That is a good place to begin. And then there is a leadership assessment. Just before you read, if you do choose to read, you might want to take a free assessment which takes less than 5 minutes to look at how wise are you in acting wise, because that would be a good place to identify where your strengths and where your weaknesses are in 6 areas. Then as you go forward, it will be a lot easier. Of course, any research we need to begin with, how do we define the terminology? So, smartness, I define it as much more closer to street smartness. So, it is the action and application of your intelligence to get ahead of others. So, whether it is recognizing the patterns, recognizing that whether Facebook has been, stock has been pretty stagnant for a while, recently it has been going up. Would that be a good stock to purchase? Or Apple is supposed to release some new phones, and some of them in next 10 days or 15 days. We know that they will get some kind of a bump because of that. Microsoft, recently their CEO announced stepping down in a few months. So, even on the day on which he announced that he is stepping down, the stock went up by 9%. It has been stagnant over a period of time. By my own analysis and by my own thinking, do I see a movement upwards? So, that could be in terms of personal benefit, in terms of finances, or it could be coming up with a new algorithm and patenting it ahead of somebody else. It could be in any different directions. Of course, I do not need to talk about to IBM researchers about the smartness. You defined it as a decade of smartness, and everything we talk about is about smartphones or smart appliances or smart meters, and of course smart home, and you talk about smarter planet. So smartness is no longer something that you can differentiate in the marketplace because of the way in which you have been talking about creating smarter stuff. Everybody is following, if not by yourself you have created a leadership in the smartness, but that also means everybody is focusing on that. That means to get ahead you cannot any longer just look at I'm smart, that's enough. Like for example, my daughter graduated from UC Berkeley and she got a pretty good grades, and she was saying, hey, it should be easy to get a job. And when we asked her when she was graduating, first get a job and then think about your trip, because she was planning on going around the world for 1 year, she said I shouldn't have any problem. So she went around for 1 year, she came back and she is struggling to find the kind of a job. But first she said, I only want this kind of a job in this kind of a field in this city. Then she expanded to say any job in this area, in this industry. Now she is coming to a place, any job anywhere, I'll take it. So in some respect, not being smart at some level and recognizing being open, actually holding back a little bit, exploring what is out there is much easier. For example, because we live in Silicon Valley, in venture capital industry they talk about if you have an idea that has a 70% of chance of success, because that is ahead of the game and that everybody is looking for, whether it is big data, whether it is, you can think of in your own field what would be the great idea which everybody is looking for. But if you go for funding, you will notice the idea which has got a highest chance of success according to their own perception, they do not want to fund that particular one, whereas the idea that has got a 30 to 50% chance of success, they would like to fund it. I asked them why. When I interviewed several venture capitalists on how they make decisions, I found out the way they make decisions is, if there is a higher chance of success, everybody would like to do it. That means there will be half a dozen to 10 people who are working on the same problem at one time. That means your chance of success, assuming everybody has gotten funded, everybody is working on that idea with a certain high quality intelligence from Stanford or wherever the high quality intelligent people working on it, your chance of success becomes like 20 to 30%. But if you take on an idea which is not as smart, which is not as ahead, and market research has not identified that as one of the greatest ideas, then your chance of success becomes a lot more, because all the people are not jumping on the bandwagon yet. It's in some respects what I am finding is smartness and success seems to be having an inverse relationship. At some level, smartness is something which may be not necessarily the smartest thing to do. So how do we go about? What is the approach? Because if we don't want to be smart, we want to be wise, there seems to be a large number of myths that are associated. As I asked you up front, only 2 or 3 of you think that you are courageous enough to raise your hands that you think you are wise. Why? Because we all have various associations with it. Let's look at some people. He was, like right now I know he is very much maligned, but he ran IMF for a long period of time till nobody knew that he had difficulty keeping his pants on. Actually, there was a lot of rumors that he is shoe-in for the President of France. I suppose President of France doesn't need to always keep his clothes on all the time, but even for France it became much harder to keep him in the position. So somewhere a person who was considered to be smart and wise and capable is no longer considered to be capable. That means wisdom is not a place to arrive and stay. Wisdom is like a quicksand. You just have to keep working on it and you have to stay ahead for that. Similarly, if you look at another extraordinary smart person who was considered to be a wise general in Afghanistan, and he led CIA extraordinarily well, but he was the person who was working with the spies and who can see everything in the world that nobody else can see. He thought he could keep a secret. So that means there is some kind of cognitive gaps that we have that make us, irrespective of our smartness or wisdom, the dumbness seems to be always lurking one step behind. You just have to forget for a moment, and then instead of wise you become otherwise. So of course the most recent one, Joe Weiner, and this is a nice one, I don't have to say very much more. Of course, only thing somebody said is his campaign slogan is sexting should be legalized. Fourth, it is also interesting to recognize that the young people we think cannot be wise. When I asked, after my book came out, I have given about 50 to 55 talks in about 8 countries. I found out whenever I ask people to raise their hands, whether it is these people or Google founders, and say, do you consider them to be smart? Every hand in the audience goes up. Do you consider them to be wise? Very few hands go up. Why? Maybe we are against young people being wise. Maybe we think wisdom requires age or experience or a few gray hair before they can be wise. Maybe certain failures and resilience makes them wise, but it is not possible. Finally, another interesting thing is wisdom means you have to give up your smartness. Many times people look at it as if you have to be wise, you cannot be smart. If you look at some of these people, in some respects they had a larger purpose. Like Gandhi, if he were not to have a larger purpose of getting the freedom for the country, he is not very different from Machiavelli. Why I say is his scheming and his approaches were very, very devious in one respect, but they are extraordinarily meaningful in another respect when you are trying to do something. Like today is Martin Luther King's 50th anniversary. There are a large number of people gathered in Washington, D.C. If you try to look at some of those people, their approaches are repurposing their smartness for wisdom. So in some respects, it is not about finding the right answers that wisdom actually deals with. It is asking the right questions. As researchers, you know, that is the most difficult thing. We all know what questions which everybody is asking, but can you identify one question which many people are not asking? That's where you can do the patenting, that's where you can go ahead, that's where you can do much more meaningful stuff. But in addition to that, if you are asking the question for the larger purpose, for the noble purpose, then you are repurposing your smartness towards wisdom. Now let me take an example, in the industry that you are in. Like Microsoft in 1999 was asked to break up the Department of Justice when it sued Microsoft for anti-competitive practices. Essentially came to the conclusion, because Bill Gates did not even want to go to the court to testify, he just did a video testimony. When the video testimony was shown, essentially the Microsoft reputation completely hit the ground, and Bill Gates decided to step aside and start a Gates Foundation. Some people thought Gates Foundation is created primarily to make sure that there is some positive buzz that can be created around Microsoft, but for whatever is the reason, after $26 billion of spending from his own pocket, Bill Gates has been reputed now as a person who is wise because he is repurposing his smartness to eliminate malaria or to look at education and become one of the greatest philanthropists of our times. On the other hand, the person whom he left behind to take care of the Microsoft, here are some wise quotes which I have gathered recently. Why am I showing this? Maybe when you are in the position of leadership, when you are ahead, when you are considered to be a visionary, when you are considered to be smart, you are asked to make predictions. because smartness is about identifying the patterns ahead of somebody else, right? It is about seeing the future that other people cannot see. Every one of the things which he saw so far has not been successful. And of course, somebody even say Gates wrote the book Road Ahead about the future in 2002 that didn't have a single word about internet. The key, what I am beginning to say is, maybe smartness is so overrated, it actually not only is an addiction, but when you focus on smartness for smartness sake, it might actually pull you down. I have a word called core incompetence. Core incompetence is your signature strength of yesterday that got you to job today might be the foot in the, might be the one that nails your foot to the floor. It's like a basketball. You know, if you have the ball, you can only move one foot. You can't move the second foot unless you are fouling it. That means you have the ball that everybody else wants, but you can only pass it. But you keep looking for everybody else, that's always an elusive goal. So smartness is something that actually has serious limitations, and here are some of them. I found out that today you might be the smartest person in the room, but that doesn't guarantee that the newest hires that you have or the interns that you have from any of the Stanford or any of them can't be even smarter than you. As a matter of fact, when I was interviewing one of the Nobel laureates, he was telling me that his Nobel Prize came not because of all the important work which he did. He had a smart-ass postdoc who always bugged him. He said, "Oh, Dr. Lee, why are you doing this? Dr. Lee, why are you not paying attention to that?" One day at 1 a.m. in the morning, he was making coffee, and this guy came up and started asking, "Why don't you look at this particular cell structure instead of that? Yeast, why are you bothered about the yeast? You should look at." He said, "On that night, I had to choose becoming a murderer because I was ready to squeeze his neck for this super smart guy who seems to think that he got everything, or to give his idea a try because he has been talking about it for 1.5 years. I said, I'm going to prove him wrong, and I started working on an idea that he said, you know, it will be interesting for you to look at. Next thing I know, I got a Nobel Prize. So in some respects, I didn't get the Nobel Prize for all the research and ideas that I had. As a matter of fact, I was trying to prove somebody wrong, and I ended up actually coming up with something that I had no clue to think about. So sometimes it is about recognizing the smartness could be a barrier. Second, smartness doesn't focus on the present moment. It does not allow you to be mindful, because smartness is about patterns in the future or what you have seen in the past. So you have to watch out, especially now that you are in services business, you are always in the context of somebody else. That allows you to be present. But many other technology companies struggle with some of this stuff. Yeah, please. Could have, but obviously selfishness somewhere, or he did acknowledge him in the Nobel lecture and all of them, but the student did not work with him. He just gave an idea saying that you need to look at, and after that it looks like they went their own way. But he did tell him that the original idea did not come from me, it actually came from a challenge that the student continued to pose. But you know, it was an interesting, he was gracious enough to acknowledge where it came from, but he was not necessarily smart enough to work with that postdoc to take him forward. So what is smart from one perspective could look at that from, you know, not very smart from another perspective, especially in a diverse context that the global world that we are living in. It is much harder to think about what is appropriate for the global world. Fourth, knowing and seeing patterns ahead of other people could lead to self-denial, because you can have a very narrow focus on your problem definition, but you may not look at the big picture. So sometimes you may have to look at larger context. That's the reason why I say smartness is the new dumb, because it can be an addiction unless you begin to recontextualize it as a wisdom. How do you do that? the way in which I find wisdom can recontextualize is by repurposing smartness, by recognizing smartness is always going to be about finding the edges, one edge or the other edge. I call one edge in the book as focusing on the business, like opportunity focus, top line focus, entrepreneurial focus, connecting the dots kind of focus. All of that I put it on one end of the smartness. Functional smartness, going deeper, making sure it gets executed extraordinarily well, making sure you actually make a idea into a product that becomes successful. All of that I put it as a functional smartness. So the same smartness, one is applied in a very narrow domain. Professors, Nobel laureates, executives who are focused on supply chain, operations, bottom line, all of them, they require one kind of smartness, or you need another kind of smartness to keep looking at entrepreneurial stuff. I want to make sure that we have access to both ends. It is just that based on success in the past, or based on our own interest, or based on our own comfort, that we begin to navigate on one end of the spectrum or other end of the spectrum. But wise leadership is about being able to move freely from one end to other end, recognizing that I have gotten too stuck on the top line, I need to begin to look at how to execute, or I am too deeply focused and I am very uncomfortable to take risks. Especially one thing which you will know is risk taking is the one that helps you to think about, am I a risk averse person, am I a risk taking person. So that is, these are some questions which you need to look at. And one way in which you can again begin to think about this is saying ultimately leadership, whether it is in the personal leadership context or organizational leadership context, could be put into three frames. One is making decisions, critical decisions obviously I am talking about, not what do I want to eat for lunch. The second is taking actions that are difficult to take, like do I want to stay in this job or do I want to go to a different department? Do I want to stay in a large company? Do I want to go become an entrepreneur? Or do I want to start my own project, or do I want to be part of somebody else's project? Several times ego gets in the way, several times name, fame, recognition, entrepreneurial opportunities get in the way. It doesn't matter what it is. Do you take the step or do you think about it? Do you get into analysis paralysis? You try to look at multiple ways of making decisions, but in making those decisions over a long period of time you miss opportunities, or you jump first and then find out that the support system which other people have guaranteed doesn't exist, so you make mistakes again and again. Both of them are on two ends of the things, but it is about taking action. The third one is communication. Leadership at some level, whether you are in a personal context or organizational context, it is about how well you communicate, how well do you listen. So if these are the three things, at some level the wisdom is about repurposing, as I mentioned, but application of intelligence coupled with reflection on the context around you and introspection on the strengths and weaknesses of yourself. So one on outside world to look at it, another on inside world to assess oneself. If you can have action and application of intelligence coupled with reflection and introspection of the inner world and use it for the larger good, that's what I am defining it as a wise leadership. So this, by the way, so repurposing it, when you do this, wisdom, because it's always grounded in the present moment, it is always pragmatic, it is always application oriented. By reading a book, one does not become wise, but by applying it and figuring out where that book can help me, where I need to rethink one more step, or where I need to talk to the author and figure out how that is applicable. All of those are what makes wisdom grounded in the reality between me and you and in the actions that I take to move towards the goal that I have. So it is a discerned action. It is an action that is taken with discernment by what knowledge that the author had written is meaningful or not. That is what makes it mindful. And that's why I'm calling it as it occurs in the present moment. Second thing is, many of the leadership issues these days especially in an entrepreneurial context, have something to do with ethics. You can talk about large number of CEOs or senior managers or individual contributors who really kind of look on the other side when it comes to having ethical clarity, and that's what led them to, hey, everybody does this. This is the way business is done. But when you are caught, you can ask, why am I caught? Everybody else is doing it. Well, it's like going on the freeway. Everybody else is speeding, but the cop gets you and cop gives you the ticket. You can't use the justification saying, look at every other car, I'm just following everybody else. No, where is your judgment? Where is your discernment? So like that, judgment, ethical clarity, and humility are the hallmarks of wise leadership. And how do you become that? So if you want to repurpose it, how do you do that? There are three approaches Confucius from China suggests. One is reflection. Large amount of reflection on the outside world and inside world will allow us to know where we are. You can't take something for granted. You have to look at which of those things are applicable. Second, imitation, what he called, now we have repurposed it as a best practices. We try to look at the best practices from outside. So look at who are the people who are role models for us. That's another way of saying, let's look at who has done it and learn from them, that is, and imitate from them. That is the easiest part of it, but ultimately the most bitter, but at the same time which will make you most wise, is to apply it, fail, gain resilience, learn from it without being defensive. That is the one that gives you experience. Peter Senge, he wrote a book called Fifth Discipline. He says, if you talk to majority of the people who have 20 years, 30 years experience, they had the same first year experience repeated 20 times or 30 times. Most people don't learn because once they become comfortable, they get into autopilot. They keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting results. That's the clinical definition of insanity, by the way. So again, that's what I try to put it through other quotes. Essentially, the smart person learns to not make the mistake from one's own experience, but the wise person doesn't even sometimes make the mistake because he learns from other people's mistakes. By the way, the key is to recognize he is not learning from other people's successes, which is what we normally look for best practices. The wisdom is looking at the mistakes other people have made and find out why they have made it and then figuring out a way to do it. Here, I thought I'll give some examples. For the book, I tried to give in the beginning large number of middle managers. My editor said there are two big mistakes you are making. Number one, these may be people whom everybody can actually recognize because they are first level managers or middle managers. Only problem is you can't sell the book because nobody knows those names. So he said, you have interviewed 200 people, pick the people whose names everybody else recognizes, because they think that if Alan Mulally has done it, Sam Palmisano has done it, Bill Gates has done it, I can do it. But if I try to give you what you call some Michelle Levy or Paul Gleiberman, or if I try to give some people whose names you can't recognize, you won't even pick up the book, let alone read it and learn from it. So let me give you some examples from senior leaders. That doesn't necessarily mean this is only for senior leaders. So Alan Mulally, I met him when he was in Boeing. He was the head of the commercial aircrafts at that time. I had interviewed him and I worked with him a little bit at that time. And then I found out he is a gentleman. When he came to Ford in 2006, he found out Ford is in major problems. They lost like $11 billion in the previous year, and then they had been bleeding Reading for a long time. So when he came in from aircraft business to commercial, automobile business, everybody said, look, he doesn't know the field at all. But he made some common sense decisions which are not very common once you become part of a certain way of doing things. Let me give some examples. He took loan for $23 to $26 billion by moniker of the Ford. He mortgaged it and took the loan. Everybody said, look, because of the financial doldrums, there is bailout money that's available. That's much easier for you to take. He said, I would rather take a loan and decide on my own destiny rather than bailout and do according to what somebody else tells me to do, because I need to begin to make up some other things. Second decision he made is they were selling, Ford had Mercury, Lincoln, Ford, Jaguar, Land Rover, 5 different brands. He said, as a CEO, I am having difficulty to say in a day 8 to 10 I will work on Ford, 10 to 12 I will look at Lincoln, 1 to 3 I will look at Jaguar. It doesn't work that way. I can't manage so many brands. Within that, I need to focus on what is my core business, what is that I need to do. So he sold off Jaguar and Land Rover to Tata Group. He closed down the Mercury, and then he stayed with Lincoln, one high end, one low end. That's all he said. And then because of that, they started saying, okay, fine, we will close Taurus. Taurus brand was few years ago was a bestseller, but everybody said, hey, you want to focus, this is not selling very well. He said, you know, this has got already built a brand name, it has got a brand value, make it work. We know it is not selling, but you need to see context of the world has changed. Similarly, they were not doing any small cars. They were focusing only on the large trucks, and they were focusing on the SUVs because they make a lot of money. They said, this is what is making money. He said, well, 2 years later, if the oil problem becomes much bigger, will you still be able to sell this? So that means if you don't know how to make money off of small cars, that is one area where we have 2 years to learn so that we can make the cars that people want, because you can't sell something else. So similarly, he made several counterintuitive decisions. He asked people to take decisions in a different way, and he communicated the logic behind his discernment and logic behind his counterintuitive decisions so that other people can do it. So he is one of the guys whom I looked at as guys whom I highlight as a wise leader. Similarly, if you look at Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, Steve Jobs was extraordinarily authentic. You know, if you have seen his movie or if you have read his book, people talk about nobody wants to get in an elevator with him because in the 1 to 3 floors that you go, in the 5 minutes of chit chat, he might fire you. And of course, he had 2 famous words which probably everybody is familiar with. You are God. Everybody would love to be God in the, what you call in the mind of Steve Jobs. Second one is shithead. And people said, you can be a shithead and God 3 or 4 times on the same day. Only thing is you can't figure out who you are at that moment, and you are always dependent on. So that way he was very authentic feedback, but he never saw what the impact of his feedback is going to be on other people, whether it demoralizes it. So he was a great in terms of idea leader, but he was not a people manager, he was not a people leader. So many leaders who succeeded in Apple, they succeeded despite berating by Steve Jobs, rather than because they were able to stand up to him, they were able to have a firm conviction about their own ideas, and they were able to prove him wrong. Because of that, they became well known for what they are able to contribute. Because of that, Steve Jobs respected them. Together they made the company work very well. On the other hand, appropriateness. Tim Cook, since he became the CEO, he actually went to China. He looked at the suppliers and employees, how they are doing. He tried to make their life much better. He gave opportunity for employees to donate to non-profits, and he did matching. And he did a lot of wonderful things. But right now, the stock had tanked 30% because they feel like he doesn't have that innovative edge. He doesn't have that edge that Steve Jobs had. So at some level, what it means is the wisdom is not about being authentic, because authenticity everybody talks about. It is not always about authenticity. It is not always about political correctness. Political correctness and empathy might make you a good manager, but if you are a manager, you are always nice to people, but your people are wondering, you are nice, but does it mean you like what I did or you don't like what I did? I don't understand from your feedback whether I am going to get the promotion that I asked for or whether I am actually going to be dinged for not doing certain aspects. So that is another way. I am sure nobody in the room has got that type of a political correctness, but you have to recognize that sometimes we go on one end or other end. Wisdom is recognizing sometimes you have to be authentic, sometimes you have to be appropriate. Similarly, again, let me bring your own example. When I interviewed Sam Palmisano, one of the things he said is, even by the time he became the CEO in 2002, he said the writing was on the wall about the PCs and about the hardware. He said by 2002, you know that the personal computers are going to be commodities, and IBM cannot really play very well in the commodity situation. So he went ahead and got rid of, as you know, the hard disks and PCs as well as the chips. All of them he got rid of and turned you into a global services, and you seem to be able to do extraordinarily well. Of course, following your lead, another business smart person, Leo Apotheker, tried to do the same thing in 2010. He closed Palm within 30 days of coming up with the HP tablets. Maybe that was too soon. Maybe he didn't have the fortitude to really see how it would be. So he made several changes. Of course, in between, he got actually fired himself in the name of trying to close certain aspects of it. He got closed. The third example I found, which is very interesting, is a gentleman, a ophthalmologist in India, who retired at the age of 58 from government service as an ophthalmologist. He had rheumatic arthritis. So his fingers were crooked and they were stuck in that position, and he was in constant pain all the time. But he said, I know how to do eye surgery and I am good at dealing with cataracts. Just because I am 58 and government doesn't have job for me, I shouldn't stop doing what I am doing. So he went ahead and said, let me see, what is my vision, what is my North Star? He said, I want to eliminate needless blindness in the world. So how do I do that? He said, let me convert my family residence, a 3-bedroom residence in Madurai, he converted into 11-bed hospital, convincing his sister and brothers, and he convinced everybody in his family, nephews, nieces and everybody to get into eye surgery, and he created it like a small family business in the beginning, where he said for every free surgery, for every person who paid money to get the eye surgery in Arvind Eye Hospital, he started doing one free surgery for somebody else. Now, for one paid patient, there will be 2 free surgeries getting done. As a matter of fact, the previous President of India, President Abdul Kalam, before he became the president, he was a president-elect. He went to get the cataract surgery in this hospital. He went in the paid section, but at that time these guys were not taking checks, personal checks. He said, I don't have cash for this. He said, don't worry. The clerk who was looking at it, he didn't recognize President Kalam at that time. He said, don't worry. If you don't have money, we don't have any problem. Just get in that line, you can get it free surgery. So this gentleman didn't have an ego at that time. He walked across, he went to the free line, and he got in line, and there were not that many people who were getting free surgery that day. So immediately after he paid, he went in and he was getting the surgery done, and he was resting with one eye already done. And the security people, the Z security, the secret service people were wondering, this guy has gone in, hasn't come out, he is not in the paid section. So they were panicking, and then they called the Arvind Eye Hospital headquarters to say President-elect is lost. So there was a major search, and then they found he was happily resting and sleeping in one of the patient beds, having a free surgery. And by the way, just to give an example, the intraocular lens, IOLs, they get the license from the patent in United States, and here it costs like between $100 to $150 for the intraocular lenses in United States from that particular brand. Same thing, they created a factory to make some of them. They sell it for $1 to less than $1 for the same thing that is sold for $100. So just to give a context, this person, out of his vision, he made the Arvind, now the largest eye care facility in the world. It is done at 1/10 or 1/20th the cost of anywhere else in that matter. Yeah. They do cataract and they deal with laser also, but primarily they began with cataract, because many times people don't recognize that they have a problem. By the time they recognize it is a problem, it's already something that they cannot deal with. He found the eye situation is something that is correctable, but it is not corrected. So he is actually done lot in India now, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Africa. It is spreading like anything. This is the only hospital where Harvard, Johns Hopkins, all of them go, even Stanford, for residency, because the doctors make 4,000 surgeries per year. Average in India is about 1,000. In United States, it's about 200, just to give a comparison. And he used McDonald's model of serving food in a McDonald's restaurant as a way that they are trying to do it here. So just to complete, and then I'll take some questions. Similarly, Indra Nui talked about food that is good for you versus food that is fun for you. Pizza Hut, the big size cola drinks are great, but she also said oatmeals and some of them are helpful. So she is actually committing to PepsiCo making 10% of the profits to come from foods that are good for you, not just foods that are fun for you. But of course, her own stockholders and stakeholders are resisting the move in there. And of course, you are all probably all familiar with the story of how the Apple started the Apple stores. I think one of the management consultants told them not to create a brick and mortar stores because everything else was going down. But he said, I want to start Apple stores not to sell Apple products. I want people to have customer experience with the Apple products. Apple products will sell themselves. And of course, they make the highest sales per square feet out of that. And just to give a comparison, J.C. Penney, where Ron Johnson, who helped Steve Jobs to create it, went to become a CEO, they make $150 per square feet. So you can see the comparison between that. But also need to remember why I brought this up in terms of wisdom is Ron Johnson is the one who had the retail experience, who helped Steve Jobs to make Apple stores extraordinarily successful, but he became the celebrity CEO of J.C. Penney about a year and a half ago. He tried to apply everything which he did in Apple and failed spectacularly. What it means is, in making decisions, as I mentioned regarding wisdom, it is not about applying the best practices from Apple into J.C. Penney. It is recognizing, using the discernment, is the J.C. Penney in the same situation as Apple, it doesn't sell premier products, and then saying there are no coupons or there are no sales. That actually went counterintuitive to what people expect in the middle or low income group. So there are many mistakes he made, because ultimately, as I said, leadership is about communication, decisions and actions. So I'm trying to give you examples. Similarly, in India, Kiran Majumdar Shah, she was actually working on oral insulin, which is the holy grail of diabetic therapy. But after spending hundreds of $millions, when the clinical trials didn't work out, the people said, don't worry, we are going to work really hard to make it work. She said, I'm a businesswoman. I need to have a right kind of fortitude. I am into diabetic therapy. Yes, this approach of oral insulin would be excellent, but I need to recognize when to focus on oral insulin and being competitively ahead of the marketplace, or when to go back to my larger purpose, which is about providing diabetic therapy at affordable cost. If I can't do that, I need to let it go. So when you have to make decisions about when to have a grit, or if you have an entrepreneurial product, when to keep working on it and make it successful, or when to cut the costs and move on. So there is wisdom in not necessarily doing the same thing everybody else did. Last example I would give is Ratan Tata, who was the chairman of Tata Group, the largest what you call company in India. He is the guy who bought the Land Rover and Jaguar from Ford Motor Company. But on the other hand, one day when he was driving in Bangalore, he saw a family of 4, wife, husband and 2 kids. They were going on a two-wheeler, a motorcycle, and because of the rain it slid and they fell down. And he took some of them to the hospital, and he realized, you know, I am a large company, I have a lot of flexibility, why can't I make cars that are affordable to people who are at the bottom of the pyramid? So he created what he called a poor man's car. But unfortunately, the marketing campaign didn't catch on. Even though the car is $2,000, nobody wants to buy a poor man's car. Even poor people want to buy a rich man's car. So the marketing they are struggling with, but that paradigm shift that he brought, it actually made it into something else. So in my book, I elaborate on, you know, I created a cheesy acronym, WISDOM, because people need to remember something, they need to remember by some kind of things. So the 6 capabilities which I talked about, I have it here. If you go to fromsmarttowise.com, you can actually take assessment in each of those where you are, and then my recommendation is, if you choose to get a book, get it and create a book club around you, practice it, take a little bit, 5-10 pages, read it, apply it and try it out, because my book will not make you wise, I promise you that. But what it will help you to do is give you some tools and some steps that you can take. If you put it to practice over a period of time, you can take it to much higher level. So that is what I felt. The smartness does not necessarily sell. You need to find a way to repurpose it, because the smartness has become a new normal. Just to try to be smart alone is actually dumb. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions and comments, I would be happy to take. Yeah, please.
On those Steve Ballmer quotes, it might be interesting to attach a year to them. Like, what year did he say that Google was a house of cards?
Oh, he said it several times. He said it in 2005, he said it in 2007, he said it again even in like 2008 time period. And Apple, actually you can go and check out this. There is a YouTube video. When the Apple announced this, he said, why would anybody buy in business a computer which, a phone which doesn't even have a keyboard? Look at where BlackBerry was and where BlackBerry is. So Steve Ballmer has got a lot of energy, passion. He can shout a lot. He almost had a throat surgery because he can do rah-rah energy. But I think Microsoft DNA is much more incremental innovation. What I mean is evolutionary innovation. But they need to look at what are they good at and figure out a way to frame it. But he never really got that part of it clear. Any other questions and comments? Yeah, please.
I think mine is more of a comment. During your talk, you mentioned several Ivy League schools as being smart, intelligent people. It seems like you're crossing off about 98% of the population.
I would say 98% of the population actually have an ability to become wise. So I'm not trying to say smartness is wrong. I'm saying smartness is the foundation, stepping stone to become wise. If you stop at being smart, that means you are living in the past of what got you here. I'm suggesting don't stop at smartness, figure out a way in which you can actually become wise. That is my thesis. So, but if I don't make it provocative, most people won't even be interested, right? Actually, I wanted to call my book Smart and Wise. Then my editor told me, if you call your book Smart and Wise, it is neither smart nor wise. Because she said there is no hook for people to buy. So you need to figure out a way to create a journey. Similarly, I'm calling it smartness is the new dumb, because smartness is accumulation of application of intelligence over a period of time that got you to feel that you are smart. I'm recommending don't sit on the laurels of yesterday's smartness, figure out how to repurpose it for a larger purpose. That is my thesis.
Time for one last question.
Last question and then we'll move on.
Okay, good.
Actually, there is no last question. And you have a question? No. Okay. Then I think thank you very much. Oh, you have one. Okay, please.
Thank you for the presentation. You gave example of few kind of stars people, and in terms of learning from stars,
Yeah.
you also mentioned better to learn from mistakes, from success stories.
Yeah.
But you gave a lot of success stories.
Yeah.
So how about failures? Where to find them? Are people willing to share their failure stories, and how that can become effective in learning some?
Excellent point. Many of the people actually, I found, fail, but still there is a stigma regarding applying and actually talking about their failures. But if you notice, the resilience we talk about only comes by learning from the failure without having the defensiveness. As a matter of fact, I have several examples of learning from failures, but because the time is up, I'll be happy to stand outside and then give you some more examples, because some other group is waiting for it. So for now, thank you very much. You have a great day.
Thank you so much for taking the time to visit us today. It's a very small token of appreciation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.